Welcome back to my Introduction to Programming Python course. This is day 2. Today we will be covering variables, arithmetic operations, updating variables, and standard variable naming. So, introduction to variables. Now, in the real world, if we wanted to store the price of a stock that is always changing, how would we do this in computer programming? Well, the answer to this is a variable. And a variable in computer science is something that has a name and is assigned a value. For instance, in the case of a stock, it would be the name of the stock would be set equal to the current price of the stock. And now that price of the stock will always be updating. And so we want to keep track of that. And we do this through variables. They are truly the bedrock of how programs function. So names are assigned to the data to represent the data. For example, if I wanted to set my name Raphael equal to the number 5, I could do this just as so. So I would say Raphael equals 5. Now, the way that we take into account assigning variables are 3 things. The first step is to pick the name. So in this case, the name of the variable is Raphael. The second is assigning a value to Raphael, which is 5 in this case. And finally, the type of the value that is being assigned. Now, 5 is an integer, so it is of type integer. And now Raphael is of type integer as well, because it is now equal to 5, which is an integer. There are 4 types that we will be covering in this guide. The first being floats, which are decimal values. The second being integers, so like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we will be covering strings, which is a list of characters. And finally, we will be covering booleans, which are true and false values. Let's play around with this in the code editor. For the purposes of this guide, we will be using the IDE Replit, which is super easy to use. There will be a link in the description that will take you directly to this page so you can follow along. Now, we will choose the language we will be working in, which will be Python, and we will pick the first result, which will be Python version 2.7. Now, to assign variables. We will start by assigning the variable that was shown in the example. So we will set Raphael equal to the number 5. Now, we can print out to the console Raphael. Think for a second, what do you think is going to get printed out? The answer is 5, because Raphael was set equal to the number 5. And its type is an integer. So if I print the type of Raphael, we can see that it's an integer. So wherever Raphael shows up in the following code, it will always be equal to 5. So now, if I said the same thing, except I changed this value to 10, well, now Raphael is equal to 10. So when I print out Raphael, it prints out the value 10. So you can almost think of the name being replaced by the number 10, but it keeps track of it, which is really nice, and it's a variable. So this is how we assign a variable in Python. We give it a name, we set it equal to a value, and whatever that value is has a type that we have to be aware of. And depending on that type, we can perform different operations on that type and do cool things. Now, I want to show you guys examples of all 4 types. So we are going to make a value x, and it's going to be equal, here, maybe I will make it a better name. So float example. So an example of a float would be 2.5, because a float is a decimal value. And we will print out the type of the float example. So we're going to print out type of float example so you guys can see exactly what I mean. So when we print out the type of float example, it's a float because it is a decimal number. Now, the way we create this is just simply by adding a decimal to any number. So this is an example of a float. So an example of an integer, like you already saw earlier with the example of Raphael would just simply be we can do an integer example. And we can set it equal to the number 5. And we can print out exactly the type of this value down here. And as you guys will be able to see, it is an int. So the float example is a float, and the integer example is an int. And this is really sweet because we can do so many things with different types. Now, an example of a string, which would be like my previous video, we can have string example, and we can set that equal to hello world. Now, when we want to print out the type of string example, we're going to get string. And so these are the first 3 types. Now finally, there's a Boolean. And now a Boolean is a true or false value. So if we do Boolean example, we can only assign it true or false values. And this is nice if we just want to check conditional logic. So if we print out the type of the Boolean example, we are going to get bool. So as you can see, this demonstrates the type of each of these values. Now if we want to print out just each item individually, we can do that as well. So we can print out float example, we can print the integer example, we can print the string example, and finally we will print out the Boolean example. Now, as you can see, even though we are printing words, we are printing out the names. So whenever we print the name, it will return to us the value and print it out. So the value of the float example is 2.5. And you can see it getting printed out here, 2.5, which in this call right here, when we say to print out float example. And this is just a quick example of the different types of variables, how to assign a value to a variable and store it. And this is so crucial in computer science and programming, and it really is a very awesome concept because we can manipulate these variables in so many ways, and they're constantly changing. As a programmer, you all have a calculator at your disposal with Python. Now, we can perform operations using Python code. And these operations are addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, and one more that we will cover in a later video. And they're quite straightforward. So the addition operation is represented as a plus, the subtraction operation is represented as a minus, and the division operation is represented as a /, and the multiplication operation is represented as an asterisk. Now, let me demonstrate exactly how to perform each one of these operations. Let us begin with addition. Now, we can add variables or simply numbers using the plus operation. So if we wanted to print out 1 plus 1, it will do the operation. So 1 plus 1 is 2, and it will calculate that in Python, just using the plus operation. If we want to subtract in Python, we can print out 20 minus 5, and it will print it out. So we can subtract in Python using the minus operation. To divide in Python, we simply change the operation to the /, and we can divide in Python. Now, as you may have guessed, we can also multiply in Python using the asterisk. So we can multiply in Python as well. Now, that seems simple enough. Well, let us combine that with variables. These arithmetic operations take into account order of operations. So if I wanted to change things up a bit and maybe add 5 plus 5 and put parentheses around it, well, we could do just that, and now things change drastically. So now it'll print out 200 because it's doing now 10 times 20. Instead of, if it were to be 20 plus 20 times 5 plus 5. This is going to give us a different result. And it's simply order of operations, and Python code takes that into consideration when performing arithmetic operations. So that's something to be aware of. Parentheses will always take priority. Let's get into updating variables. We want to update variables when situations have changed. For example, at the beginning of the day, if you wanted to keep track of your money, let's say you started with $10, and then you buy a $3 candy bar. You now have $7. How would we write this in code? So we could say Raphael equals 10. Now, to replicate the transaction of me buying a candy bar that cost $3, we can say Raphael equals Raphael minus 3. So what do you think the value of Raphael is at this moment after the operation Raphael equals Raphael minus 3? Well, if you guessed 7, then you are correct, because Raphael is the value of 10 initially, and so when 3 is subtracted to it, it's as if saying Raphael is now equal to the value 7. Now that can be a little confusing, but updating variables are crucial to manipulating data, and let's see some examples of this. Let's see some examples of updating variables. So say we had a variable called cookies, or total cookies. Total cookies equals 3. So there are 3 cookies in total right now. Well, Luke's belly can fit 1 cookie, and Yoda's belly can fit 2 cookies. Now, if Luke eats a cookie, we can model this by saying total cookies equals total cookies minus Luke's belly. And we can say Luke's belly equals Luke's belly minus 1, because Luke just ate a cookie. So if we print out total cookies, what do you think it's going to give us? It's going to give us 2, because Luke just filled his belly with a cookie. He just ate a cookie from the cookie jar. And now there are only 2 cookies left. If we want to print out Luke's belly, how many cookies can Luke's belly fit now? Well, 0, because he just ate a cookie. And so since he only had room for 1 cookie, now there's 0 room left for any more cookies. So that's a way that we updated total cookies and Luke's belly. Now, if we want Yoda's hungry, Yoda wants some cookies. So we can model this by saying total cookies equals total cookies minus Yoda's belly. And we can do Yoda's belly minus equals Yoda's belly minus Yoda's belly. So now Yoda's stuffed at this point. So if we print out total cookies and we print out Yoda's belly, well, now since Yoda ate both the cookies, now there are 0 cookies left in the cookie jar, and since Yoda ate 2 cookies, there is no more room for cookies in Yoda's belly. So this is an example of updating variables and how we'd want to update a variable. So as you can see in total cookies, we updated this 3 times. So we set total cookies equal to the value 3 initially, so right here. Then we said total cookies equals total cookies, which is 3, minus Luke's belly, which is 1 at this point. So you can think of it as if it was 3 minus 1, which is 2. So now total cookies is now equal to 2 at this point. Now, and that gets printed out right here, and that is the 2 in total cookies. Now the third time when total cookies gets assigned is down here when Yoda eats some cookies. So total cookies equals total cookies minus Yoda's belly. So at this point, total cookies is 2, and Yoda's belly is 2, so 2 minus 2 is 0. So therefore, total's cookies is now set to 0. So there's no more cookies left. And this would be an example of why we'd want to update variables to keep track of a total, in this case, cookies, and subtract from it to determine how much of it is left, or add to it if more goes in. If we wanted to add 100 new cookies to the total cookies, we can say total cookies equals 100 plus total cookies. And if we wanted to now print out total cookies, it's going to give us 100 because since there were 0 cookies to begin with, so it's saying in this case 100 plus 0. Now total cookies is equal to 100. So now there's 100 cookies left when Luke and Yoda's bellies are replenished. And this is an awesome way to update variables. What you guys should all notice is that when doing these operations, you can put in numbers, variables, and you just have to remember that variables in this case are numbers because that's what we assigned them to in the beginning. We could not set totals cookies equal to like a Boolean value. Well, in this case we can because technically a Boolean value is 0s and 1s, but here we can't set it equal to hello. Hello. Yeah, it won't work because a string can't be added to an integer. That is something also to notice about Boolean values. I will explain that really quick. Is that when you set something to example equal to true, this is actually represented as 1. So if we wanted to say print Boolean example plus 1, it will give us 2 because this true value is equal to 1, whereas false is equal to 0. So it would print out 0 plus 1. So that's something to also note. But yeah, so now that you guys got to see some examples of updating variables, let's dive right into some name practice standards. Introducing standard Python variable naming. In Python, traditionally, we follow the naming practice of snake case. Now, an example of this would be this variable that I created, Raphael underscore Rivas, that has been assigned the value of 0. So, as you notice, both of these words are lowercase letters. There's no capitals involved, and there's an underscore that separates them to make it a lot cleaner. Now, it's important to abide by the naming practice of the computer science language that you have chosen to program in, because if you want to collaborate with others, they will also be following this practice, and it avoids confusion. Another good naming practice is making sure that when you name your variables, they're relevant. So a good variable name would be you underscore should underscore subscribe equals true, because the statement you should subscribe is a true or false value, which is a Boolean. And since you are assigning you should subscribe to a Boolean value, that would be a good practice, since you should subscribe is a true or false statement, and it's relevant to what is being held in the variable. A bad example of a variable name would be capital N name capital E 123 equals bird, which has absolutely no correlation whatsoever. And so that would be an example of a bad variable name. And it's important to get into the habit of making relevant variable names, as well as abiding by snake case. Because keeping your variable names relevant allows for others to understand your code as well. And if you wanted to go back a month and look at some old code to reuse, it's so essential to be able to understand it, because if it happened a month ago, you probably forgot what your code does, and good variable names can help clarify it. Whereas not so good variable names will only make you more confused. And so that's just a quick jump into the standard Python variable naming and why all of you guys should really try to practice it and make sure you guys have good variable names. This concludes the end of Python Day 2. Comment and feel free to ask me any questions and leave any suggestions. I'm always open to them, and I love all feedback. Make sure to like and subscribe for new uploads. I definitely want to share this channel with as many people as possible, and so that really helps accomplish that. So if you know anybody who you think might be interested in programming, make sure to tell them, let them know, shoot them a link. It would really help me out. And finally, just a quick tip on how to be a productive student in learning how to code. So there was a study done a while ago, and in the study it found that when you learn something new, you only retain 30% of it. And that's really low. Like, that's really, really low. And it might be high enough to get you past the test. So if you studied and learned something, maybe you took a test on it and you did okay. And that's great and all, but if you went and took that same test a month later, you might not remember and get as good of a grade if you have forgotten so much because your retention is so low. However, there's an easy remedy to just jump your retention level, and that is to explain the concept to somebody else. If you can explain the concept to somebody else, it increases your retention to 80%. And that's so important when learning something new, especially something that you might want to have ingrained and really have memorized. And so I encourage everybody to explain their code, explain these concepts to somebody new, and just see if you can. And that will dramatically increase your retention level. So that was just a quick tip on how to be a productive student in learning how to code. I will see all of you guys tomorrow.